Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Tonight, we travel to Vienna, to a palace chilled by early winter and hushed by something heavier than snow. Tonight, we meet a woman, not yet a queen, not yet ready, who will become one of the longest ruling monarchs in European history. But for now, she is just a daughter. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about your favourite historical moment, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. Feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let these gentle whispers of history lull you into sleep. You awaken in Hofburg Palace. The stone corridors are lined with mirrors, but you barely notice your reflection tonight. You walk past the lacquered furniture, the gold-framed paintings, and the thick carpets that swallow sound. It is late, past the time of court musicians and candlelit suppers. A draught slides under the grand doors behind you. It smells faintly of snow, of parchment, and of silence. You're 23 years old, and everything has changed. The letter arrived hours ago. You still see the wax seal, broken at the corner where your thumb trembled. It carried no ceremony, just a line of tightly spaced script. Emperor Charles II is dead. You are now sovereign of the Habsburg lands. Your father is gone, and with him, the last piece of protection you didn't know you were still clinging to. All that remains are cold titles written on vellum Archduchess of Austria, Queen of Hungary and Bohemia, and Empress consort to an empire that may or may not believe in you. Outside, bells toll, but they do so reluctantly, as if unsure whether this is grief or uncertainty. Inside, the courtiers wait, some with raised eyebrows, some with folded arms, some with polite smiles that don't reach their eyes. You know they whisper that a woman cannot rule this patchwork empire, that the pragmatic sanction, the decree your father spent years fighting to secure your right to inherit, is only paper now, that the kings of Europe signed it with fingers crossed, and you, raised to sing, to stitch, to speak gently, now sit at the head of a table where everyone doubts you. Still, you sit. A servant enters to refill the fire. He does not speak, but he lingers a little longer than he should, as if waiting for you to tremble. You don't. Your fingers rest atop the table. No ring, no scepter, just the pressure of thought. You remember how your father would stare out at the gardens, his mouth folded in deliberation. You used to think he was listening to birds. Now you know better. He was hearing choices. There is a scratching sound, faint, deliberate. You realize your pen is moving across a piece of paper, half a letter, half a prayer. You're writing not to the kings of Europe, not to your future advisors, but to your sister. Dear Marianne, it begins. You tell her nothing of policy, just the colour of the sky that morning and the way the windows fogged from the inside. It's what you know how to do, to notice, to feel, to witness. And yet, within that softness lies a steel no one sees yet. Because even now, even as foreign ministers circle like hawks, even as Prussia's Frederick eyes Silesia like a fox sniffing the henhouse, you begin reading briefings. You ask for your father's private papers. You walk the palace not in mourning, but in measurement. Where are the strengths? Where are the cracks? A curious moment in the hallway near the Empress chapel. You find a bundle of unsigned documents. Among them a forgotten plan for a tax reform, scrawled in a messy, tired hand. Beside it, a note in your father's own ink. Too soon for her. You smile faintly. Too soon, baby, but now it's yours. The flicker of candles grows unsteady. Perhaps it is sleep. Perhaps the ceiling sighs. The wind outside has settled, for now. Historians still question whether your early policies were truly your own, or guided by your husband, Francis, or by chancellors who saw your youth as an opportunity to shape you. But you remember this night, this very night, as the first moment you knew you would not be shaped. You would shape. The letter lies beside you now, curled at the corners. The bells have stopped, and still you do not tremble, not yet. The morning comes quietly. It does not arrive with trumpets or ceremonial robes. No, the sun simply slides along the frost-covered eaves of Hofburg Palace and brushes against the velvet drapes of your chambers. You do not stir immediately. For a few seconds, you allow the illusion that nothing has changed, but it has. You rise before the rest of the court, stepping barefoot onto the chilled floorboards. A maid gasps and rushes to find your slippers. You wave her off, not unkindly. You want to feel the ground, something solid, something real beneath your feet. Today, they will present you to the court as their sovereign, but the crown you wear is not the physical one. Not yet. That lies still in a vaulted room, flanked by ceremonial guards. The real burden is invisible, and it's already settled on your shoulders, warm and heavy as wool in snow. In the mirror, your hair is pinned too tightly. You adjust it yourself, loosening it just a little. You're not sure why. Perhaps because today, of all days, you wish to feel like yourself, whoever that may be. You dress in cream and silver, not mourning black. It's a statement, gentle but unmistakable. By mid-morning, the throne room is filled with breath held politely behind fans and waistcoats. The air tastes like old wood and powdered expectation. Courtiers line the hall in double rows, standing straighter than usual, as if erect posture might ward off uncertainty. You step forward, alone. Your husband walks behind you, not beside you, at your request. All eyes scan you from toe to crown. Some approve, some do not. You can hear them without hearing them. She looks too young. She's not trained. She has a pretty chin. But can she govern? And yet, you walk. Because this moment is not for them. It is not even for your late father. It is for the throne itself, which has waited in silence for whoever dares to occupy it. You sit, no grand declaration, just gravity. The hush is profound. There is no coronation yet. Hungary will not recognize you so easily. The Hungarian Diet is already restless, and beyond those mountains, Prussia watches. So does Bavaria, Spain, France. You know, they all know that Charles VI's Great Pragmatic Sanction, that document that twisted diplomacy into knots for 2 decades just to allow you to inherit, is about to be tested. Ink means little when armies can march. Even now, reports whisper of Frederick of Prussia moving troops towards Silesia, a rich province, a tempting prize, a young woman on the throne to him. That's as good as a carved invitation. Yet here you sit, spine straight, hands calm. A curious historical footnote one observer, an English envoy perhaps, wrote of your posture that day. She bore the air not of a girl discovering power, but of one remembering it. That same day, a member of your council suggests a regency. Until the Empress is more acquainted with statecraft, he says, folding his words in sugar. You pause, and then, in a voice neither loud nor sharp, you say Austria does not need a regency. It needs resolve. That silences the room more effectively than any bell. Still, you're not naive. You do not underestimate the storm you inherit. The treasury is nearly empty. The military is hollowed out. Your advisors are divided, and you are a woman. A woman, and soon, a mother again. You carry your fourth child beneath your corset, though no one dares mention it aloud. There is a strange paradox in the room, the sovereign and the swelling of life, occupying the same body. Later that night, in your private quarters, your fingers trace the edge of a small wooden box. It contains one of your father's seals. You do not use it. Not yet. Instead, you write in your own hand. The first decree under your sole name. A small one. A reassignment of taxes on grain exports. But symbolic. Yours. Historians still debate whether you truly understood, in those first weeks, the scale of the inheritance you had accepted. Some claim you were too romantic, too idealistic. Others argue you had always been quietly observant, biding your time behind silk veils and music practice. But in your own letters, to your sisters, to Francis, to your children in later years, a tone emerges, not arrogance, but absolute conviction in the legitimacy of your reign, not because you were born to rule, but because you would learn to rule. And now, as the fire softens and the palace settles again into its late-night hush, you lie in bed, not asleep, not quite awake. There are no tears tonight. You cried yesterday. Today, there is only the strange rhythm of responsibility. You close your eyes and think of Silesia, of maps, of the Hungarian nobles who still do not kneel. But for now, just the quiet crackle of logs and a baby stirring gently inside you. The empire rests, for now. And so do you. Morning comes again, but this time the light feels different, sharper, more brittle, as if even the sun is unsure how to proceed. You're awake before the first bell of matins. Your hand lingers on a folded map of Central Europe, its creases deep like age lines on the skin of a continent. The borders are elegant, drawn in faded ink, but nothing on this parchment is fixed, especially not now. You stare at the outline of Silesia, a fertile land, rich in iron, full of textile towns, and nestled like a jewel between your Austrian heartland and Bohemia. It is not the largest province, but losing it would be like misplacing a tooth in a carefully constructed jaw. The bite of the empire would be off forever. You know that Frederick, Saint of Prussia, young, ambitious, and already famed for his cold wit, has written you a letter. It arrived yesterday. You've read it 3 times. He congratulated you on your accession. He also suggested, ever so politely, that Silesia would be better off under Prussian protection. A pretense, a courtesy, a warning. No one uses that kind of tone with someone they respect as an equal. Frederick is testing you, and not with words. Already, scouts report Prussian troops approaching the Oder River. They march without music, but with purpose. And in Vienna, your council is divided. Some urge diplomacy, some urge surrender. It's only one province. They murmur, let it go. Empress, solidify your rule elsewhere. You don't answer. Not yet. You prefer to listen a while longer. In the next room, your son plays with carved wooden soldiers. The nursemaid hushes him gently, afraid to disturb your thoughts. He lines the figures along the windowsill, pretending the frost outside is a battlefield. You watch for a moment, unobserved. He places the smallest soldier in front of the largest tower. He does not move it. He just lets it stand there, alone, defiant. That evening, you summon your ministers. The fire is low. The table is long. You are dressed not in royal finery, but in a simple gown of deep blue. The room feels like a quiet confessional more than a council chamber. I will not cede Silesia, you say. The silence is absolute. A few faces pale, one or two turn away, feigning adjustment of collars or sleeves, but you do not blink. The war is coming, and whether you welcome it or not, you must be ready for it. A lesser-known moment occurs in the next few days, one historians often omit. You walk the city streets alone, or nearly so, wearing a plain cloak. No guard, no trumpet, just the Empress and the cold. You pass through market squares where fishwives gossip with steaming breath. You pause by bakeries whose windows fog from within. You watch a boy carry firewood, heavier than he should be able to lift. Without complaint, you don't speak, but you see everything. And when you return to Hofburg, cheek stung red from the wind, you do not issue proclamations. Instead, you write a letter to Frederick. You tell him, simply, that Silesia is not his. You do not write with threats. You write with certainty. There is power in that. He does not reply. Instead, on the 16th of December, 1740, just weeks after your father's death, Frederick crosses the border. The War of the Austrian Succession has begun. Historians still wonder whether Frederick ever truly believed you would resist. Some say he expected hesitation, collapse, a hasty treaty. Others argue he wanted war all along, but needed the excuse of a weakened female ruler to justify it. What is certain is this: he misjudged you. You do not cry. You do not plead. You send letters. You call for troops. You speak before the Hungarian Diet with your infant in your arms. That moment will come later, but already you are planning. War, after all, is not just fought on fields. It is fought in hearts, in resolve, in long nights spent reading reports by candlelight. While the rest of the palace sleeps, you are not a general. But you are something more dangerous. You are a mother with something to protect, and in the darkness that is more than enough. You wake to the scent of paper and soot. Another night has passed, or perhaps just a few hours. Sleep is no longer a luxury you afford yourself. Your rest comes in moments now between audiences, between dispatches, between contractions. Yes, contractions. Because in the very same week that your generals argue over troop movements, you are preparing to bring another life into the world. The irony is not lost on you. Empires fracture. Borders bleed. Men argue over crowns and maps. And yet, within you, the quiet work of creation continues unbothered. You walk slowly through the palace corridors, one hand at your back, the other resting gently on your stomach. The servants nod, some avoiding your eyes. You can see the uncertainty in their faces. How can a woman be both battlefield and cradle? But you are. You must be. At a desk piled high with petitions and letters from distant provinces, you sit down and begin writing. Your script is calm, each word carefully chosen, each request given due attention. You have no time to waste. The Prussians do not. That afternoon, another courier arrives. His face is grim, his boots wet with winter mud. He delivers word that the city of Breslau has surrendered to Frederick. Silesia, it seems, is slipping through your fingers. Your advisor suggests sending envoys, a temporary concession, they say, for the safety of the realm. But you know a concession now becomes a precedent later. And so, once again, you write a letter, this time to your cousin in Saxony, and another to the court in London. You'll not fight alone. Some nights you do wonder if they are right, if you're stretching yourself too thin, chasing too many fronts: diplomacy, motherhood, defence, legitimacy. But then a soft cry breaks the thought. The baby has arrived. A daughter, your 5th child. You name her Maria Carolina. Her skin is the colour of milk and moonlight, her breath soft but certain. The birth was difficult. The midwives say you nearly fainted, but you don't remember. What you do remember is opening your eyes and seeing your husband's hand in yours, for once gripped tightly, his gaze more frightened than yours. Francis has always been loyal, even if unsure of how to help. He is no commander, no statesman, but he loves you in his quiet, unassuming way. Later that evening, as your child sleeps in a cradle beside the fireplace, you sit upright in bed, writing again. There are 2 copies of the same letter, one for the King of Sardinia and another for the Dutch Republic. You propose a new alliance, not with swords, but with promises, not in ink alone, but in faith. One of your maids, a kindly old woman from the countryside, approaches with a cup of broth and says softly, "You should rest, Majesty." You shake your head. "I will." After the next letter, aber should not argue. This is the rhythm now, child. Paper, war, sleep, prayer, repeat. And so, when the Austrians suffer a stinging loss at Mollwitz in the spring of 1741, you feel it sharply. Not just in your politics, but in your bones. Because while your generals rode into snow-covered fields, you were nursing. While Frederick lined his troops, you were bleeding onto linen sheets. Yet, you do not yield. And your people see this. There's a lesser-known moment not recorded in most royal archives, when, shortly after the battle, you ask to be taken into the kitchens. The cooks protest. It isn't safe, but you insist. And there, between the copper pots and the smell of onions, you speak to the staff, not as an empress, but as a woman. You thank them. You ask what they hear from the markets. You listen. You listen. Because you know that a nation does not stand on maps or treaties alone. It stands on bread, on trust, on the sense that even the invisible ones, the bakers, the tailors, the guards in the night, are seen. Historians still debate whether it was your resilience or your alliances that saved the empire in those early years. But many agree on this: you refused to disappear. You showed up even when it hurt, especially then. And now, as the winds whip against the palace windows, and the child beside you stirs again, you whisper a lullaby. Not one from the courtly canon, but an old Tyrolean tune your nurse sang when you were small. It's a soft song, a simple one, but it's been enough to hush armies, just for a night. Outside your window, winter begins to loosen its grip. Vienna emerges from its icy silence in small gestures: the clink of water dripping from stone fountains, the muted rush of carriages on thawed cobbles, the sound of children laughing again in palace courtyards. But your world does not warm so easily. War still hums beneath everything. Letters arrive daily, some with cracked wax seals, others smudged from rough travel, reports from the front, updates from diplomats, secret warnings from allies too timid to speak openly, and threaded through it all the name Frederick, Frederick of Prussia, cold-eyed, calculating, and now deeply entrenched in Silesia. They call him the young philosopher king, though you find little wisdom in how he disregards treaties and dances circles around tradition. He writes essays on tolerance while sending troops across your borders. He praises enlightenment, then darkens your skies with invasion. He is clever, you admit that much. But cleverness is not always depth. And you are no philosopher. You are an empress, a mother, a heartbeat in lace and letters. And this, you now understand, will be a long war, one you cannot win alone. So, you write again. This time, the tone is different. You reach out to your oldest enemy, France. Yes, France, the House of Bourbon, the mirror of your own Habsburg bloodline. For decades, your ancestors danced their chess game of marriage and mistrust with theirs. Now, you must play a new tune. Historians will later marvel at the sheer audacity of it, a young empress reaching across centuries of rivalry to offer a fragile olive branch. But you are not interested in pride. You're interested in preservation. The letter is carefully phrased. You suggest mutual interests. You remind the French of shared borders, not broken ones. And, above all, you offer what few others can, your daughters, not as gifts, not as pawns, but as bridges. You write of Maria Anna, of Maria Christina, of alliances born not in spite of love, but perhaps quietly because of it. Some ministers protest. You would marry your daughters to enemies. They whisper, scandalized. But you know better. The world of kings is not built on friendship. It is built on balance. And your children, raised with warmth, music, and philosophy, may well be your most powerful weapons. Later that week, a courier returns from Paris. Louis XV is curious, intrigued, not opposed. It is not a treaty. Not yet. But the silence that follows is promising. And then unexpected news. England, watching your moves with France, decides it must not be outmaneuvered. They offer modest financial support, not a declaration, but a purse, enough to fund mercenaries, enough to delay another loss, and Saxony, once hesitant, begins to lean your way. So does Piedmont, slowly, reluctantly. The tables begin to turn. You notice the change first, not in letters, but in posture. The court bows slightly deeper. Your counsellors speak with less suggestion, more deference. You walk the halls and find the hush of uncertainty replaced with something quieter, steadier, belief. Still, your nights remain long. You spend hours seated at your writing desk, ink smudged on your fingers, papers in tall, uneven stacks. Outside, you hear the distant rhythms of a city that keeps breathing, bakeries opening at dawn, the clipped hooves of riders changing shift at the palace gates. There's one detail, minor perhaps, that lingers with you. A court musician, new to Vienna, asks to perform for your children. He plays a strange little tune on a hammered dulcimer. You pause, listening. It is a melody you faintly remember from your youth, a folk song from Moravia, where your grandmother once sang. You smile, and for a brief moment, in the swirl of war and diplomacy, something soft returns. Historians sometimes question your role in these early coalitions. Was it you, truly, who guided the alliance-making, or your chancellor, Count Kaunitz? Was it your hand that wrote the terms, or simply signed them, but the letters remain? written in your script, with your pauses, your flourishes, your corrections. It does not matter whether your generals approve. You've already begun to turn Europe on its axis, and as you close your eyes that night, baby in the cradle, fire low, snow now gone, you whisper one line aloud to no one in particular: I do not need to be like them. I only need to last longer, and so you will. The year is 1742 now, and the war has begun to bite. Outside your window, Vienna's streets wear the mood of endurance. Candle merchants sell wax by the half-stick. Seamstresses reuse old thread. In taverns, the wine is thinner and the toasts quieter. You still rise before dawn. Your lady-in-waiting sometimes protests, gently, but she understands now you're not a queen who rules from a chaise lounge, wrapped in velvet. You're up with the sun, reading troop reports while the coffee is still bitter and black, and the reports are grim. Frederick has struck again, swiftly, without warning. Your forces were scattered near Chotusitz. Another Prussian victory, another piece of your inheritance bleeding away. One advisor, wringing his hands, suggests another letter, a new plea for peace. You pause. And then, softly, if we retreat with every pressure, we will have no empire left to defend. The truth is, you are tired, not defeated, but tired in a way that sits behind your eyes and in your bones. Tired in your back from carrying not just your youngest daughter, now nearly a toddler, but the weight of expectations from every crumbling province. And yet, you carry them both. There is a portrait of her, painted around this time, rarely displayed, but known to historians. It is not the formal one, not the stiff-jawed regalia of state. It is simpler. You stand beside a writing desk, hair pinned loosely, holding a rolled parchment in one hand and your child in the other. The artist, perhaps unintentionally, caught a moment between breath and command. It is not a portrait of power, it is one of resolve. Around you, alliances continue to shift. Bavaria, ever ambitious, declares itself against you and tries to claim the imperial crown. Charles Albert of Bavaria even has himself crowned Holy Roman Emperor. That stings. The Habsburg crown, worn by your forefathers, is now placed on the head of another, an interloper. And for the first time in centuries, Vienna must look to a foreign court for the emperor's seal. But even as they take your crown, you keep your ground. Your armies, rallied anew under Austrian generals, begin to fight back, not gloriously, not yet, but they hold, they dig in, they outlast, and you do something no one expects. You travel to Hungary. It is a land often wary of Vienna, proud, noble, and not easily tamed, but it is vital. Its soldiers are among the fiercest in your empire, and you know the weight of tradition matters to them. So you go. You arrive in Pressburg wearing Hungarian dress. You hold your son in your arms, the heir to the throne, his small face round and solemn. You stand before the Hungarian Diet, a room filled with noblemen sceptical of Vienna's intentions and of yours. And then, in a moment that later generations will immortalize in oil paint and opera, you speak. You do not read from a scroll. You do not beg. You simply ask. You ask them to defend their sovereign, to protect the inheritance not just of Austria, but of a shared realm. And when you say you will die with your people, if necessary, they rise, all of them, and shout their oath, Vitam et sanguinem pro nostra regina, our lives and blood for our queen, The words echo. You do not cry, but your throat tightens. It is not often, in the life of a ruler, that you're given something freely. That night, as you ride back to your carriage, the wind carries the scent of soil and smoke. You breathe it in and think of your ancestors. You wonder whether they ever truly ruled, or simply held things in place until something stronger came along. You intend to be that something. There's a lesser-known moment the next morning. Your maid finds a copy of the speech, rewritten by hand in your private notebook. Beneath it, only one line: "They believed me." Historians still argue whether that belief saved the empire, but you never doubted it, because belief in war, in policy, in motherhood, is what steadies the hand. And your hand does not shake, even as Frederick plots anew, even as Charles Albert sits briefly on the imperial throne. You wait, you rebuild, and you do not forget. You awaken before dawn, the chill of late spring creeping beneath the window panes of Schönbrunn Palace. Outside, the gardens sleep in their neat symmetry, trimmed hedges waiting for light, gravel paths untouched since last evening's walk. But inside, your thoughts are already in motion, turning like clockwork gears behind your closed eyes. Today, you will open the portrait room. It is not a formal chamber. It does not appear on the official maps or tour paths of the palace. To most, it is simply a side gallery near the north wing, modest, tucked away, with poor lighting and no obvious grandeur. But you know better. This room, filled with portraits of emperors, queens, advisors long since buried, is not for guests. It is a place for memory, for meditation, and, increasingly, for strategy. You walk there slowly, the echo of your slippers tracing a path through velvet and wood. The room is cold, as always, but comforting. You like the stillness, the soft creak of aging canvas, the way the eyes in each painting seem to observe, not accuse. This morning, you stop before one particular frame. It's not your father's, though his is here too, looking out with that firm, unreadable expression. No, you pause before Leopold Rostand, a distant Habsburg, a quiet man with heavy eyelids and a famously pronounced chin. His reign was marked by endurance, through plagues, sieges, and Ottoman threats. Not glorious, not dramatic, but he held the realm together. You study his face for a moment, then you speak softly, not expecting an answer. You endured. I must transform, because holding the realm is no longer enough. You have watched Europe shift beneath your feet. You've seen treaties fail, alliances turn, titles mean little in the face of steel and silence, and you've learned something that no portrait can teach: power must move. And so, today, you begin something new. In the portrait room, you unfurl a map, not of provinces or rivers, but of relationships, daughters, cousins, courts. The lines are drawn in ink and lace. You begin writing plans not just for battlefields, but for marriages. Maria Anna, thoughtful and poised, could she be sent to Portugal? Maria Christina, artistic, charming, a better match for Saxony. And someday, perhaps, your youngest, the one with storm-coloured eyes and restless hands, will be bound to France. But that is far in the future. You have no illusions. These are not fairy tales. They are strategies. But you take comfort in one detail: you've raised them not as decorations, but as minds. Even so, you keep your doubts locked in this room. It's here, in the soft glow of morning, that you also review the latest reports from Bohemia. The winter campaign was harsh. Roads iced over, supplies ran thin, but your commanders, cautious and clever, held the line. And for the first time since Frederick's advance, there is space, not victory, but breath. You consider it carefully. If spring continues to favour you, there may be room for a counter-offensive, maybe even a pushback into Moravia, but you must tread carefully. One misstep and your fragile alliances will waver. You close the map, fold it, press the crease. Later that day, in the state study, you meet with Chancellor Kaunitz. He's younger than most of your circle, sharp-tongued but shrewd. He proposes reforms, ideas for restructuring taxation and streamlining the army's supply chains. Others in court roll their eyes when he speaks. You do not. You listen. Always. Because you know the empire you inherited cannot be the empire you leave. There is a lesser-known account from a minor scribe in your court. He wrote that during one of these early reform meetings. You quietly asked, "How many bakeries are there in Lower Austria?" The room paused. No one knew. You nodded. Then we're not ready for war. Or peace. It was not a jest. To govern is to know the shape of the land, the needs of its people, and the systems that keep it fed. You begin requesting such inventories regularly, grain stores, orphan counts, salt prices. To some, it seems trivial, but to you, it is the foundation of sovereignty. At night, when the hall's quiet again and the fire burns low, you sometimes return to the portrait room, not to plan, but to think. You light a single candle, let it flicker beneath the portrait of your father. You do not speak aloud, not tonight. You simply sit in the quiet and remember. There is a strange comfort in these painted eyes. They do not judge, they only watch. And as the candle pools wax onto the floor, you make a silent promise the empire may change, but it will not fall. The year turns again. Now it is 1743. War still simmers, but the edges have dulled. Prussia, though still in Silesia, holds back, perhaps regrouping, perhaps watching. Frederick's pen grows sharper than his sword for now, composing letters filled with philosophy and smug restraint. You receive them, read them, and smile thinly. There are more pressing matters at home. You spend your mornings not on horseback or in the war room, but at your writing desk, where you prefer to command from a place of ink and thought. The letters have not stopped. Reports, proposals, complaints, and yet, increasingly, there is another category among them: reform. A school in Graz requests permission to admit girls. A physician in Prague petitions to open a clinic for the poor. A town in Lower Austria asks for tax relief after a flood. These are not the affairs of emperors. These are the affairs of empresses. And you attend to them. Slowly, a new image of you begins to emerge. Not the war queen, not the young sovereign in mourning, but something subtler, the reformer. You do not call it that. You simply adjust things. When asked about a policy, you often respond, "What is most reasonable?" It disarms men trained in debate, in pride, in hierarchy. You're not here to dominate them, only to govern well. And yet, it is precisely this restraint that commands respect. A story is told, whispered more than written, of a meeting you held with university scholars in Vienna. One professor, bold and opinionated, challenged the need for modern languages and education. Latin has served us for centuries, he insisted. Why dilute learning with vulgar tongues? You listened patiently. Then replied, "And how, sir, shall the mother read to her child if she must first study Cicero. The room fell silent. From that point forward, education reform took quiet root. Historians still debate which reforms were truly your idea, and which were nudged into place by your advisors. Chancellor Kaunitz, especially, looms large in these accounts. But he never claimed sole credit. In fact, in one surviving letter to an ambassador in France, he wrote, "She sees further than most men, though she rarely lets them know it." You laugh when you read that, quietly, privately. You never desired the reputation of a radical, but you do desire clarity, and so you begin a new habit. Every week, you review one subject of the realm, not from a minister's report, but from the mouths of people themselves. You meet with midwives, tax collectors, millers, Jewish merchants who rarely get summoned to the palace but arrive in worn shoes and careful silence. You ask questions. They respond cautiously at first, but you learn to ask in ways that do not threaten. You listen in ways that encourage. This is your education, the kind no imperial tutor could have given. At night, you speak less to the portraits and more to your own reflection. You see lines forming now at your eyes, not from age, you're still young, but from watching, worrying, working. Your children grow. Maria Anna, quiet and steady, now helps you sort correspondence. Joseph, your eldest son, runs through the corridors, stubborn and wide-eyed, constantly questioning the world around him. You love him fiercely, but you sense already the fire that will make ruling alongside him one day. Complex. One evening, you find him in the palace chapel, staring at a painting of the Virgin Mary. "Why does she always look sad?" he asks. You pause. "Because she knows what's coming." You answer. He says nothing, but he does not leave the painting for a long time. There is a lesser-known moment, recorded by a palace seamstress, who entered your study one afternoon to deliver fabric samples and found you teaching your daughters geography using tiny carved figurines and a candle to simulate the sun. The children laughed, rearranged the kingdoms, spilled ink on the map, but you remained calm. You told them maps are just stories, and stories can be changed. You never meant it as a lesson in power, but it became one. Outside the palace, the people begin to speak of you differently. The soldiers still call you the Iron Lady in silk, but the merchants speak of fair tariffs. The clergy, even those uneasy with your leanings towards secular reform, grudgingly admit your piety is sincere, and the peasants, they whisper of your visits, of your questions, of how your eyes did not blink when they spoke plainly. Not love, not reverence, but trust. And in governance, trust is worth more than gold. You retire late again. The night is warm, rare for spring. You open a window, letting the air sweep in. The scent of lilacs and oil lamps. The sound of the Danube murmuring somewhere far beyond the city walls. In the dim, your ink dries slower. Your candle burns low. And you think this is not the rain your father imagined, but it is yours. The palace gardens stir with the sense of summer. It is 1745 now. The city hums softly, no longer vibrating with the panic of war, but not yet fully relaxed. In Vienna, even peace feels temporary, but for the first time in years, the skies are no longer filled with the distant smoke of approaching fires. Inside Schönbrunn, the corridors echo with small feet, your children. Now a bustling constellation of names and personalities. There are 9 of them now, each one a miniature sovereign of their own moods, thoughtful, mischievous, stubborn, soft. And you're both mother and monarch, always both. You keep a notebook now, tucked in your desk drawer. It contains only one line at the top of the page, children as diplomacy. Beneath it, names, potential matches, notes on temperaments and bloodlines. You never show it to anyone, because even you find the thought cold, but necessary. This is how empires survive, not only by fortresses and decrees, but by marriages, timed as carefully as troop movements. And your daughters are exceptional. Maria Anna, now a young woman, speaks fluent Italian and writes letters with elegant wit. Christina is bolder, her laughter sudden and irreverent. She will not marry easily, but she will charm anyone she chooses. Maria Amalia has taken to dancing, and Maria Josefa to birds. She keeps a cage of finches near the garden and sings to them in Latin. You love them, which makes this harder. Because soon they will be betrothed, and you will choose the hands that take them. At night, you trace their faces as they sleep. You wonder whether they will ever understand why. You hope they never fully do. Meanwhile, the wider board is shifting again. Charles Albert of Bavaria, the man who once claimed your imperial crown, is dead, and the Diet has chosen a new Holy Roman Emperor, your husband, Francis. You sit beside him at the coronation, not as the sovereign, but as the consort, a role you've worn in name but never truly accepted. Yet, as the crown is placed upon his head and cheers echo through Frankfurt, you feel no resentment, you feel relief, because while Francis was never your political equal, he is your ally, your complement. He smooths what you sharpen and steadies what you rush. You lean toward him as he descends the steps and whisper, "Well, now we both have our crowns." He smiles. "I think yours weighs more." That night, back in Vienna, you host a quiet celebration. Nothing ostentatious, just musicians, lanterns, and chilled wine on the garden terrace. The children run barefoot on the grass, trailing ribbons and peals of laughter. You sit alone for a moment on a stone bench, watching the stars emerge. A maid approaches, hesitant. She carries a letter. You open it and read by candlelight. It is from Frederick, still in Prussia, still writing like a playwright. He congratulates you. There is no sincerity in the words, but there is a trace of respect. He refers to you now as Her Majesty, without qualifiers. It's something... Historians debate whether this correspondence marked a turning point in his view of you. Whether the man who once saw a young girl with no claim now saw a sovereign who had, against all predictions, endured. But you know what mattered more, you no longer cared what he thought. Your empire was healing. Silesia may be lost, for now, but Bohemia remains. Hungary thrives, and your name is spoken not with doubt, but with admiration, even in foreign courts. There is a lesser-known letter you write to your daughter Anna around this time. She had asked why you did not wear jewels more often at court. You replied, "Because I do not wish to be remembered for what glitters, but for what endures." You fold the letter carefully. The next day, you summon a cartographer. You ask him to redraw the empire's borders, not because they have changed, but because you want to see them anew, through fresh ink, with a new name at the top of the page. Maria Theresa, by the grace of God, Archduchess of Austria and Queen of Hungary and Bohemia, protector of the faith, guardian of the realm, and quietly, a mother with many hands to let go of and many yet to hold. The candlelight flickers across the desk. casting long shadows across ledgers, correspondence, and yet another report on provincial tax burdens. The palace is quiet, the children are asleep, and for the first time in days, you have a moment alone, or nearly alone. You tilt your head and realize you're not quite by yourself. A visitor has arrived in print, not person. Voltaire. Yes, that Voltaire, philosopher of Parisian salons, master of wit, sworn enemy of superstition and bad rulers alike. He's written a letter to you, or rather, about you. A copy has reached Vienna, and someone, likely with ill intent, has placed it delicately atop your stack of papers. In it, Voltaire praises your courage, your intelligence, your resolve, and then, as expected, he undermines. He wonders aloud whether you're too attached to religion, whether your devotion to the church blinds you to progress, whether Austria, under a female pope, will ever embrace the true enlightenment. You read the words slowly, not because they hurt, but because they amuse. You remember hearing about Voltaire long before you ascended the throne. You admired his style, if not his sharp tongue, and you've heard of his patronage at Frederick's court, the philosopher king keeping his philosopher close. You smile, not cruelly, just knowingly. You do not write back. Instead, you call for ink and paper and issue an edict that few will remember by name but many will feel. A new policy increased funding for parish schools, with stipulations for the teaching of science and mathematics alongside scripture. You're not refuting Voltaire. You're surpassing him, because you do not need to argue with men who write poems about virtue. You're too busy building institutions that teach it. This is your response action, not debate. In the months that follow, your court receives visits from philosophers, naturalists, architects, musicians. Some are drawn by your reputation, others by your reforms, and a few, you suspect, by sheer curiosity. A woman who governs like this they come to see for themselves. You welcome them politely, offer tea, ask questions, but you're not swayed by flattery. One young philosopher presents a paper on the natural weakness of the female mind. He reads nervously, his gaze flickering toward you for signs of disapproval. You nod gently when he finishes, then ask, and yet, here you are, seeking favour in a female court. He flushes crimson. No one discusses the paper again. There's a quiet shift now in the way people speak of your reign. No longer simply the war queen or the pragmatic empress. You are becoming the scholar empress, the woman who rules not only by birthright or bravery, but by thought. You commission the founding of new academies. You fund translations of medical texts. You increase the licensing requirements for midwives, not to burden them, but to ensure mothers and children survive. Your critics, and there are still many, murmur that you're softening the empire, that Austria is not France, and should not indulge in these intellectual whims. But you know that strength is not only measured in steel or taxes, it is also measured in whether a peasant girl can read, in whether a boy with a cough can see a doctor, in whether your daughters and others' daughters can be more than diplomatic currency. There is a lesser-known decision made around this time, a small law passed allowing widows to inherit family land in certain border regions. It doesn't make headlines, but it changes lives, and it's yours. One day, in the Schönbrunn Gardens, you stroll alone, a rare pleasure. You pass by an artist sketching roses. He doesn't recognize you immediately. You pause, curious, and ask what he's drawing. He replies, "The shape of order." You smile. Isn't that what we're all doing later? When he learns who you are, he sends the sketch to your chamber. No inscription, just the rose, delicate, complex, quietly powerful. You hang it beside your desk. That evening, you find a letter waiting, not from Voltaire, from your daughter, Maria Christina, away now at court in Brussels. She writes of her marriage, arranged but gentle, of Flemish architecture and late walks near the river. She closes with a question. Do you think I will matter? Mama, even if I'm not on a coin, you take the letter to the window and read it again, slowly, and then, by candlelight, you write back. You tell her you matter because you feel, because you ask, because you listen when others speak too loudly, and because your name is your own, not just an echo of mine. You do not seal the letter with wax. You fold it softly, as one folds a prayer. That night, you dream not of wars or taxes or philosophers with clever pens. You dream of gardens, of daughters, of a future where empires are not feared, but trusted, and in the soft hush of Vienna's midnight, the scholar Empress sleeps. Rain falls steadily against the palace windows, not the dramatic thunderstorm of opera stages, but a soft, persistent drizzle, the kind that seeps into the corners of stone courtyards and makes torches sputter. Vienna's streets wear a sheen of water. Horses clop more slowly, carriages splash less cheerfully, and inside the Hofburg, life continues with lowered voices and longer coats. But not for you. You are already dressed. Your cloak is draped across your shoulders, boots laced, gloves in hand. You've refused the covered carriage. Instead, you walk. Your attendants hesitate. Majesty, the weather. You shake your head gently. It's only rain. Outside, beneath a dull grey sky. You walk the narrow streets of the inner city. Past fishmongers sweeping out their stalls, past students rushing beneath awnings, past a baker who pauses, mouth open in recognition, and bows low with flour-dusted fingers. You do not wave, you nod, because today is not about visibility. Today is about presence. For weeks now, there have been whispers of illness in the city's northern districts. Not a plague, exactly, but something close. A fever, a cough that lingers, a swelling in the throat. Some call it the grey sickness. Physicians debate its nature. Some blame the water, others the wet spring. Most shrug. But you do not shrug. You do not hide behind palace walls. So you visit the hospitals, not the grand ones built with stone arches and stained glass. The smaller ones, wooden floors, oil lamps, linen washed too thin. You move slowly, hand pressed to your skirts so as not to touch surfaces unnecessarily. But you see everything. You see the young woman coughing blood into a cloth she tries to hide. You see the doctor, sleeves rolled, explaining to a boy's mother that the fever may not pass. You see the priest, gentle and exhausted, murmuring blessings more to himself than anyone else. And they see you, not the Empress, radiant in court dress, but the woman who stands in the middle of their grief and listens. You make no proclamations. You issue no orders on the spot. But the next day, wagons arrive, with blankets, with bread, with lime for sanitation, and with physicians trained in cities far from here, some even from Leiden, from Basel, from Rome. Historians often overlook this chapter of your reign. They prefer the wars, the marriages, the legislation. But in quiet pages of parish records and city archives, Your name appears again and again beside the simplest word sent. You sent help, and in doing so, you rewrote the idea of rule, because power that stays behind glass is ornamental. Power that walks in rain, that heals, that listens, that is something else. That is service. Back at the palace, you return without fanfare. Your boots are muddy, your gloves stained. A court lady gasps. A servant offers to burn the cloak. You refuse. You hang it yourself in the vestibule. Let it dry. Let it remind you. Later that week, you meet with councillors about another matter entirely, grain tariffs in Moravia. The conversation drifts, as these things do, from trade to taxation to peasant unrest. One minister, perhaps forgetting himself, mutters. They complain like they matter. You do not raise your voice. You simply ask, what use is a subject if he cannot speak silence? Then scribbling, then change. You begin a new initiative, local councils, small, informal groups that can report directly to regional governors. Not revolutionary, not dramatic, but the beginning of something, of listening. That same month, in another part of the palace, preparations begin for a celebration, not yours. Your daughter Maria Amalia will soon be betrothed to the Duke of Parma. You do not love the match, but you see the necessity. Italy is fragile. Austria must have footholds. Maria Amalia argues. She weeps. She protests. She pleads to marry a man she's met only once, in secret, a Saxon noble with kind eyes and no real title. You listen, you ache, and still you decide. Later, you write to a confidant. A crown cannot be passed from mother to daughter, but duty can. The wedding proceeds. Maria Amalia wears white. You do not weep. You do not smile too brightly either. You simply hold her hand before she steps into the carriage and say, "You are stronger than you know." She squeezes your fingers, says nothing. The carriage door closes. Another piece of your heart rides away. There is a lesser-known gift you send after her, a small wooden comb, carved with a pattern of violets and vines, hidden beneath the velvet lining of her trunk. A note inside reads, "For the days you wish to feel home." The next time you receive a letter from Parma, it is marked with a violet seal. That evening, you walk through the rose garden alone. The rain has stopped, but the earth is soft. The roses lean heavy on their stems, petals swollen with recent water. You bend slightly, fingers brushing one, not to pluck, just to feel. There are wars still to manage, reforms to push forward, daughters to send, sons to challenge. But for this moment, there is only rain-washed silence, and you, still standing, always standing. The palace is quiet tonight, not from sleep, but from attention. You sit in the council chamber long after the candles should have burned low. Your ministers have gone home. The scribes have gathered their papers. The polished chairs around the great oak table stand empty, their shadows like silent witnesses to the day's debates. Before you lies a single sheet of parchment, no flourish, no heraldic seal, just a simple document, draft of legal codification, Lower Austria. You run your fingers lightly along its edge. The wording is dry, but the meaning is not. It is the first step in something you've been dreaming of since the early days of your reign, the reformation and centralization of Austrian law, because for centuries, justice in your empire has been a thing of layers, noble courts, church courts, regional customs, urban privileges, a patchwork of precedent and privilege. stitched together by the hands of feudal memory. And now you begin to unpick that stitch, gently but firmly. You do not wish to erase what came before, only to clarify, to lift the veil that obscures fairness, to ensure that a peasant in Graz and a merchant in Prague and a widow in Linz all know, at least roughly, what is expected of them, and what they may expect in return. This is not a dramatic reform. There are no statues raised in its name, but it may be the most enduring work you do. You begin with inheritance law, always a point of pain. You ease restrictions on daughters receiving property when sons are absent or incapable. Then turn to marriage age, work contracts, even local governance where possible. You eliminate confusing oaths and outdated rites. Not everyone is pleased. Some nobles complain, loudly, that tradition is being flattened, that dignity is being traded for bureaucracy, that the old ways, with all their ambiguity and flexibility, served the crown just fine. You let them speak, and then you remind them, in that calm, precise tone of yours, that law must not only serve the crown, but the people. A lesser-known moment occurs during one of your audiences with a group of Viennese guild representatives. They ask, nervously, whether a new clause about uniform trade inspections applies to them. You pause, consider, then ask them what they believe is just. They hesitate. You smile. That is where the law begins. From then on, your advisors often joke, quietly, that you are the only monarch in Europe who governs as if running a school. They mean it mockingly. You take it as a compliment, because schools teach, and you believe, above all, that a ruler must do the same. This belief seeps into everything you touch now. The curriculum at universities expands. Latin remains, of course, but you encourage the teaching of modern languages. You order new training materials for midwives. You fund translations of foreign legal codes for comparison. You even insist on a standardized calendar across all provinces. No more feast days shifting from village to village. Time, you believe, should be as fair as law. You spend evenings at your desk, pen in hand, listening to the rhythmic scratch of your writing. Occasionally, a maid brings tea. Sometimes your husband stops by to kiss your forehead, offer a joke, or simply sit near you in silence. Francis is not a man of policy, but he is a man of patience. He understands that when your brow furrows at a particular line of text, it is not stubbornness, but compassion, trying to find form. You often fall asleep with ink stains on your fingers. One morning, your son Joseph finds you this way, head against the table, cheek resting on a draft of the civil code. He covers you with a shawl, then quietly reads the lines you are editing. Later, he asks, "Do you want to change everything?" You open your eyes slowly, smile, and answer, "No, just enough." This moment is remembered in his later years, when he becomes emperor and pursues reform with a fire that sometimes burns too quickly. But you never forget how change must come not as a flame, but as a light carried carefully through darkened halls. That summer, as the legal reforms are published district by district, you receive hundreds of letters. Some are formal, others are scribbled in childish hands or dictated by priests. One is from a widow in Carinthia who thanks you for clarifying her right to own the vineyard left by her husband. Another from a blacksmith in Brno who jokes that now his neighbour can't steal from his yard and claim God gave him the apples. You pin that one to your writing board. Humour, you've learned, is the sound a people make when they feel seen. That night, standing in the great library, You run your hand along the spines of centuries. So many rules, so many words, and yet so few have protected the voiceless. You vow to write more, not in poetry, not in proclamation, but in law, because empires may fall, crowns may tarnish. But a mother who makes the world more understandable for her children, that memory tends to last. Vienna's summer hums softly, not with fanfare or grand parades, but with music drifting from open windows, the quiet bustle of horse hooves on sun-warmed cobbles, and the clink of goblets in shaded palace gardens. The war, for now, recedes to the margins of your calendar, a line item, a distant rumble. You do not trust it. You allow yourself to breathe. And in that breathing, something stirs again, Art. Tonight, a new opera is to be performed in your court theatre. Not a state commission, but a youthful experiment, the work of a boy not yet 20, nervously pacing backstage with ink-stained fingers and too much hair. You enter the theatre not with ceremony, but simply in a gown of soft gold. No crown. Your children sit nearby, whispering. The chandeliers shimmer overhead. The overture begins. And for a while, you forget the weight of maps and marriages and military budgets. The music carries you elsewhere, not far, just inward. It reminds you that rule is not only a burden, but a rhythm, a timing, a harmony between voice and silence. Later, the boy will be introduced to you. He will bow too deeply and spill words of admiration in a tumble. You will thank him gently and request a copy of the score. His name is Gluck. You sense already that he will be remembered. In the weeks that follow, you host more evenings like this, chamber quartets, salons of poetry, even masked balls that end early enough for you to still read before bed. The court responds with enthusiasm, and though you are not frivolous, you understand the value of softness. A kingdom without beauty is not strong, it is brittle, and yet, beneath the silken strings, you remain watchful. One morning, a report arrives from Hungary unrest among the tax-levied nobles. Not rebellion, but something simmering. They write of burden, of policy, of broken tradition. You ride out within days. The court advises against it. Let a deputy handle it. They murmur. Your presence will escalate. You disagree. You arrive not in full regalia, but on horseback, in a simple green riding coat. The nobles are assembled in a draughty hall, musty with history and dusted with pride. They expect a lecture. Instead, they receive a conversation. You listen. You remind them of their importance, their role in defending the empire, their lands and privileges, and then, softly, you remind them of the peasant families who walk hours to church, barefoot, through fields they do not own. Do we rule? You ask. To be served or to serve, they do not applaud, but they also do not resist, and in compromise, the unrest subsides. That evening, alone in your chambers at the edge of the countryside, you reread an old letter from your father. His handwriting was always neat, always calculated. It ends with a line you never fully understood. Until now, an empire must be feared to survive, but loved to be remembered. You think of that line as you look out over the hills. You do not wish to be feared, and yet your children, now growing into themselves, see in you a firmness that sometimes frightens them. Joseph, in particular. He is 13 now, bright, restless, brilliant in mind, but sharp in tone. He challenges your decisions more often. argues in front of ministers, quotes philosophers in Latin when scolded. One evening, you find him in the garden, reading. "Why do you fight me?" you ask. He looks up, startled, then shrugs. Because you expect too much. You sit beside him on the bench. The hedges tremble slightly in the evening wind. And do you know why I expect so much? He doesn't answer. Because the crown will not forgive you for being soft. Not you. Not me. Not anyone. He stares at the gravel path, lips pursed. "I don't want to be like you," he says, too quickly. You nod. "I hope you'll be better." He doesn't reply. But the next day, he rises early, sits through court, takes notes, asks questions, politely. You love him, fiercely, and fear him, too. Not for what he is, but for what the world will demand of him. There is a lesser-known moment, recorded only in your personal papers. You write, "Joseph speaks as if he is already emperor. I pray he will first learn to be human. In the court, they call him your fire. But you know he is still a boy, staring at a mountain and thinking he must climb it in one leap. You will teach him to climb that autumn." Vienna blooms again, not with flowers, but with scholars. Your reforms draw thinkers from across the continent. Some bring new ideas on agriculture, on physics, on governance. Others simply seek your audience. You begin hosting monthly lectures at court, small, focused, and open to women as well as men. This too is remembered, not in monuments, but in minds. The years move quietly now, like a river that has found its course. It no longer carves its way through rock, no longer crashes in foam and fury. Instead, it winds steadily, confidently, toward its destination. You're no longer young. Your hair, once the colour of burnished gold, is now streaked with the greys of long nights and decisions made alone. Your hands, once delicate, now bear the softness of age and the calluses of ink. But your stride remains sure, your voice clear, and yet the mirrors in the palace are less kind. You do not linger before them. A valet once remarked, not unkindly, that you no longer order new gowns as frequently. A court lady asked whether you meant to have your portrait updated. You shook your head. Let them remember what they need, you said, not what they see. Your children are nearly grown. Maria Christina is married now, happily, it seems. She writes to you with affection, her letters dotted with sketches of foreign cities and dogs and architectural flourishes. Maria Josepha writes less. She's grown quiet, contemplative. Maria Amalia in Parma is more openly rebellious in her tone, but there's warmth in it too, like a daughter poking at a mother to feel her love confirmed. And Joseph, he is now your co-ruler, officially, the Holy Roman Emperor, your son, your student, and your opposite. He believes in sweeping reform, immediate change, clean cuts and sharp lines. Where you soften edges, he sharpens them. Where you consult, he commands. He is brilliant, but he is impatient. You admire him and worry for him. He comes to you one evening in the council chamber, flush with excitement. He lays a proposal on the table, one that abolishes certain noble privileges in Hungary without compensation. They'll protest. You murmur. They must, he says. If they don't, we've failed. You pause. Justice must move, but not all at once. He looks at you, eyes narrowed. You move too slowly. You meet his gaze, and you too fast. The silence that follows is not angry. It is filled with something heavier, the realization that two rulers, even bound by blood, may rule two different worlds. He leaves the chamber without bowing. Later, you write in your diary Joseph's crown weighs heavier than mine, and he hasn't yet learned that some burdens are meant to be shared. Still, he is your son. You send him a book, Montaigne's Essays, with passages underlined. He sends back a dry note. I've already read it. You smile. One morning, you wake to find that the trees in the garden have turned. It is October. The chestnut leaves fall in waves, like letters scattered on the lawn. You walk among them slowly, feeling the crackle under your boots. Two gardeners nod as you pass. One calls out gently, "A good year, Majesty." You stop, consider. "Yes," you say, "a year with roots." The gardener grins, whether he understands or not. You do not mind. Inside the palace, your staff prepares for another round of reform review. This time, your focus is on the censorship laws. You have long resisted the heavy hand of book bans. Now, you make clear that tolerance must guide the realm's pen as well as its sword. One pamphlet, recently printed in Prague, dares to critique your earlier war efforts. Some ministers want it burned. You do not. Let them remember the mistakes, you say, or they'll be too eager to repeat them. It is not popular, but it is policy. A lesser-known moment comes on the anniversary of Francis's coronation. Your husband, older now and greyer than the coins that bear his face, brings you roses from the Schönbrunn garden. He does this quietly, no ceremony, just the two of you in the library, with tea and honey biscuits and an old map between you. He places the roses in a vase beside your desk. "You've changed," he says, eyes soft. You raise an eyebrow. "I've aged." "No," he says. "You've softened." You do not answer, but later, after he's gone, you find yourself staring at the map a little longer, tracing the places where your lines have held, where your decisions, slow, deliberate, sometimes painful, have built something steady, and you realize he's right. You have softened, but only in the way a stone softens when it's shaped by water, smoothed, not weakened, refined. Later that evening, as the palace settles into its autumn hush, you return to your desk. Another draft of another reform lies waiting. This one concerns orphanages, funding, oversight, care standards. You review it not with haste, but with attention, because these children, unlike your own, have no powerful name, no correspondences from foreign courts, no portraits in waiting, but they matter. And your name, your reign, will stretch longer than your breath. So you write, quietly, carefully. The morning arrives in a hush. It is one of those days where the air carries no scent, no breeze, no promise of change. Schönbrunn Palace is still, but not in the peaceful sense. It is the stillness of held breath, of routines worn thin, of servants moving a little slower than usual, their eyes cast downward. You are not unwell, but you are diminished. You feel it in your bones now, the ache that lingers longer than before, the fatigue that doesn't lift with rest. Your physicians say little, only offer more infusions of bitters and camphor, more walks, more steaming cloths held against your chest. You nod, politely, then return to your work, because you do not believe in surrender, not to illness, nor sorrow, nor age, not yet. Still, your mornings begin later now. You no longer rise before the sun. Instead, you let the light wake you slowly, its warmth slipping through the embroidered curtains, brushing your cheek like the hand of a long-lost friend. When you do rise, you dress simply. A shawl, a plain gown, no jewellery save a locket with your children's initials carved inside. You carry it always now, not for show, for memory. Your routine has narrowed. You receive fewer ambassadors, attend fewer audiences. You now prefer smaller councils, brief, direct, respectful. You speak softly, but firmly, and when you pause between thoughts, no one interrupts. They wait, because now they listen with a kind of reverence. The sharp edges of your authority have been replaced with something deeper gravity. They know, though no one says it aloud. You're nearing the end of your reign, but your mind remains as sharp as ever. One afternoon, you meet with the hospital architect, a tall, nervous man with plans under his arm and ink on his cuffs. He bows 3 times before laying out a proposal for a new public hospital in Vienna's outer district. You look at the plans, ask 3 questions. Where will the windows face? How far is the closest water source? How many steps from the children's ward to the apothecary? He stammers through the answers, then stops. Majesty, forgive me. I thought that I wouldn't notice. No, no. Only, he falters, then straightens. Only that you would not have to. You smile gently. I still choose to. He leaves the meeting dazed, but changed. Later, he tells his apprentices she rules like a surgeon, gentle, precise, and unafraid of blood. You never hear this story, but you would have approved. Meanwhile, your son Joseph continues to press forward. More reforms, more decrees. He challenges the clergy, the nobility, the very structures that kept your empire standing. You understand his urgency. You feel it, too, but you worry he burns too hot. One evening, as the 2 of you review a budget proposal, he raises his voice. Just once. It's too slow, he says, exasperated. You always wait. Wait for balance. Wait for consensus. History doesn't wait. Mother. You set down your pen. Look at him. History isn't made by haste, you say. It's made by hands that keep working. Even after applause fades, he says nothing. But the next morning, he brings you your tea, silently, gently. That is his apology. Another letter arrives from Parma. Maria Amalia writes more often now. Her tone has softened. She describes her gardens in vivid detail, lemon trees and rosemary, and a cat that insists on napping in her lap no matter where she sits. You laugh when you read it. There is a lesser-known reply. You send her a packet of pressed lilac petals, wrapped in linen, a small note. They bloomed late this year, as some things do. Your heart is tired, but it is full, and your people, they continue to write to you. A widow from Styria thanks you for the grain relief fund. A midwife from Innsbruck sends you a hand-knit shawl. A group of school children from Moravia mail you a drawing of the empire, each province coloured in with crayon, misspelled, joyful. You pin it to your study wall. You no longer need portraits. This is your image now. In late autumn, your physician asks if you'd like to reduce your schedule, perhaps skip the winter court session. You shake your head. We don't abandon the table just because the meal is nearly done. He bows and quietly wipes the corners of his eyes. You do not speak of death. Not yet. But you begin to prepare. You request all your correspondence be organized. Not by date, but by recipient. You begin writing farewell letters, not dramatic or tearful, but soft, grateful. You reread your own journals. You burn some pages. You leave others open, and at night, when you lie in bed, eyes on the velvet canopy, you do not count regrets. You count memories. Maria Anna's laugh, Christina's stubborn grace, Joseph's fierce gaze, Amalia's defiance, the scent of library leather, the sound of horses returning from war, the rustle of skirts in a hallway that is never quite silent, and through it all, your quiet promise to leave the Empire stronger than you found it. You're almost there. The evening light softens the edges of everything. Columns, shadows, even the lines of your face in the polished glass of Schönbrun's long windows, all bathed in that mellow gold that comes only with age and autumn. Outside, the statues stand quietly, their marble shoulders warmed by the setting sun. Inside, the candles are lit early now, not for grand effect, simply because your eyes tire more quickly. You move through the palace more slowly these days, but you still move. There is no illness that truly confines you, only a quiet wearing down, a gentle yielding of the body to time, but not of the will. In recent days, you've begun to take comfort in the gardens again. The rose beds are fading, the orange trees are brought inside each night, tenderly wheeled into glass shelters by gardeners with hands older than some of your ministers. You greet them with nods, sometimes with questions about soil, frost, or rain. They always answer with pride. You've always trusted gardeners. They understand patience, and they prune what no longer blooms without mourning it too loudly. This afternoon, you walked the lower terrace with your maid, wrapped in a shawl the colour of faded plum. You stopped before the basin and watched the water catch the sky. It reflected back your own gaze tired. Yes, but deeply steady. How long have I ruled you? Asked quietly. Your maid hesitated. Nearly 40 years, Majesty. You nodded, then whispered, and I still feel like I'm just beginning. Not from doubt, but from awe. Because ruling never becomes casual. It is always a choosing day after day. And the weight of that choosing never quite lessens, only grows more familiar, like a stone carried in a coat pocket over decades. You've begun sorting through your letters. There are thousands, some from foreign kings, some from daughters, some from people you never met, millers, schoolmasters, women asking for help with dowries or land claims. You keep more than you discard. You leave notes in the margins, and you begin writing one more letter, one meant for your children. You do not yet know whether it will be read aloud or found later in a drawer, but you write it slowly, over days, shaping each sentence like it's the last. My dearest children, it begins. I did not rule perfectly. I did not love each of you in the same way, but I loved all of you fully, and I tried every day to build a world in which you could walk without fear, speak without shame, and serve without regret. You pause, then continue. Whatever you inherit from me, let it not be just land or names. Let it be the habit of care, of asking, of listening. Later that day, Joseph comes to see you. He has just returned from an inspection in Moravia. He speaks of roads and tithes and the overreach of certain monasteries. His tone is sharp, his facts are accurate, but his shoulders, they slump slightly. You see it, even if he does not. You offer him tea, he waves it off, paces, then stops abruptly. Do you regret it? He asks. You lift an eyebrow. Being sovereign, he clarifies. Would you have chosen this life again, knowing how long it would last? How heavy it would become? You do not answer immediately. Instead, you rise, slowly, Walk to the window where the last of the day glows like a final candle. You rest your hand on the sill, then you turn to him. No one chooses the weight, you say, but we choose how we carry it. He nods. He understands. Later, you find something strange and sweet in your study, a sketch folded inside a book of sermons. You don't know who placed it there. It shows you not in your formal court pose, but seated on a bench, hand outstretched to a pigeon. The face is only half finished, but the expression is unmistakable. Calm, rooted, present. You don't recognize the artist. But you keep the drawing. Tuck it behind a framed map of your empire, the one redrawn years ago with your name at the top. There's a small, barely visible ink blot near Bohemia. You never had it cleaned. It reminds you that even maps carry imperfections, that no line is final, that rule, like life, is always in revision. And so you light a final candle, not for the work ahead, but for what has already been done. A nation steadied, a family raised, a woman remembered. The great hall of Schönbrunn is quiet. Not the ceremonial silence of state, but the deeper hush of familiarity, the hush of furniture that knows your footfall, of walls that have heard your voice grow from girlish soprano to steady contralto, of windows that have watched you pass 1,000 times and know the rhythm of your breath. Today, you move more slowly down the corridor. A walking stick rests lightly in your hand, not from weakness, but for balance. You have not surrendered to frailty. You have simply learned to walk with it beside you. You pass portraits of yourself at earlier stages. One, especially, catches your eye. It hangs in the Western Gallery you at 32, seated with infant Joseph in your lap and Maria Christina standing to your right. The expression you wear in the painting is calm, composed, but now older, and standing before it. You wonder how much of it was real and how much was painted in. You linger only a moment. There is still much to do. Though your ministers manage most day-to-day affairs, you remain involved. Letters continue to arrive, petitions, questions, and you, still sharp, still unwilling to pass everything along. Answer them in your own hand when you can. You've recently reopened a review of your military hospitals. It seems small, an aging Empress focusing on army linens and bandages, but you know better. You've seen firsthand how morale lives in the little things, whether a wounded soldier is offered clean sheets, whether he sees sunlight from his cot, whether someone greets him with warmth. So you issue a new decree. Modest but firm, every garrison hospital must keep a garden, even if only a few pots, even if only herbs, because healing does not come from medicine alone. Your physicians raise no objection. They've long since stopped underestimating your instincts. There's a lesser-known exchange from these final years barely mentioned in memoirs, recorded only in a footnote by your secretary. You asked, during a council session, whether a prisoner's petition had been answered. An aide replied, "Majesty, he is guilty beyond doubt," and you responded without looking up. So was I. Once. No one asked what you meant. Perhaps not even you. But guilt, like power, wears many forms. Your days are still full, but your nights have changed. Sleep comes in fragments. You wake often, not from nightmares, but from memory. Sometimes you rise and walk the halls. Not far. Just enough to hear the echo of your own steps, to be reminded that you are still here. Still part of the story you've been writing for 4 decades, and in the darkest hours, when the moonlight reaches across the stone floors like a hand outstretched, You allow yourself one indulgence, letters to the dead. You don't keep them, you burn them after writing, but you write them nonetheless. To your father, who never saw you rule. To Francis, who once calmed your stormier mornings with a look. To Maria Anna, your beloved daughter who passed too young, whose voice you still sometimes think you hear in the nursery corridor. These letters do not ask for answers. They are not confessions, they are echoes, and they keep you company. One night, Joseph finds you asleep at your desk, quill still in hand. He does not wake you. Instead, he drapes a shawl over your shoulders and reads the top of the page. Just a list, really. A simple inventory. Names of towns visited. It stretches back decades. It is, perhaps, your quietest achievement the way you showed up. Not just in court, but in coal towns, in flood-struck villages, in border provinces too remote to matter to most rulers. But they mattered to you, because they were yours. And now, the empire prepares to change again. You've begun the process of stepping back, though not formally. You allow Joseph more authority, more decisions. He handles it with increasing confidence and increasing impatience. He wants reform, rapid and sweeping. He sees you as too cautious, too sentimental. You do not argue, but one evening, as the two of you sit in the palace library, you offer him a book. It is your personal volume of Tacitus, worn and marked. You say only, he understood how quickly fire spreads. Joseph smiles politely, but does not yet understand. He will. That same week, a young composer visits the court. He's not famous yet, but he has promise. You receive him briefly, listen to his sonata, praise his restraint. When he bows, you ask his name. Mozart. He says, Wolfgang Amadeus. You nod. It's a good name. Later, you write in your journal, too many notes, but such beauty. He plays like someone remembering the future. You do not know he will carry Austria's name far into the centuries, but you suspect it. By now, the city streets murmur your name with softness. The market vendors speak of your laws with reverence. The nuns in the orphanages teach children to pronounce Maria Theresa not as a queen, but as a symbol, like bread, like warmth. You have ruled so long, even time seems to bow to you, but you feel its breath on your shoulder now. Still, you're not afraid. You've written what you can, planted where you must, left behind not monuments, but habits, the habit of care, the rhythm of reform, the expectation that leaders must serve. And when you sit alone in the garden one last time before winter, watching the last of the roses fold into themselves, you smile, because you know it was not perfect, but it was enough. The first frost of winter arrives without ceremony. One morning, you look out across the Schönbrunn gardens and see the earth dusted in white, not snow, but hoarfrost clinging delicately to each leaf, each stone, each iron railing as though the night had been writing in silver. You press your fingers to the cold glass. The garden is quiet now. The fountains have been drained, the citrus trees pulled indoors, the birds, even, have fallen silent. You recognize the signs. So much of your reign has been about reading signs, entreaties, in tempers, in the movement of armies or the tone of your children's voices. But this one is unmistakable. And personal, your body is beginning its farewell. You do not say this aloud, not to Joseph, not to your daughters, not even to your most trusted attendants. Instead, you continue as always. Your days remain full, Lighter, perhaps, but never idle. You review petitions, meet with envoys, and write letters in the same steady hand. But increasingly, your energy is like the last log on the hearth, glowing, dependable, but bound by time. Still, you are determined to leave your affairs in order. This week, you finalize a decree extending protections to tenants against unfair evictions in rural regions. The nobles resist, but you hold your ground. Even the smallest cottage must have dignity. You write in your margin note, you initial it with a quiet flourish. A lesser-known act passes days later, the reclassification of certain apprenticeship rights for girls in textile guilds. It is small. It will be buried under greater policies in the pages of history, but you remember your own childhood, the needle, the loom, the way some women never had the chance to do anything else. Not every battle is won on the battlefield. That evening you sit with Joseph. He brings wine, Hungarian, dry and dark as ink. You sip slowly, watching the fire. There is a new calm between you now. The friction of youth has softened into something like rhythm. He speaks of new policies, of visions he hopes to realize. He still chafes at limits, but now he listens more. You tell him, without fanfare, that the empire will soon be his alone. He nods, but says nothing. After a moment, he places a worn book in your lap, your old copy of Tacitus, returned. I understand now, he says simply. You close your eyes, not from exhaustion, from gratitude. Later, in your study, you open the journal where you've been writing your final reflections. You write a single sentence at the top of the page. Legacy is not what remains, but what repeats. Then you set down the pen, you rise, walk to the window, and allow yourself to recall. You remember your father, his voice, measured and distant. You remember the night you first read the letter naming you heir, the tears you didn't shed, the fear you did not admit. You remember the court sessions, the coronations, the battle reports, the silences between decisions, the ministers who stayed, the ones who left, the betrayals, the loyalty. You remember each child, each birth, each name whispered in the dark. You remember music, Gluck's chords, Mozart's beginnings, the lullabies you hummed with heavy eyes and an empire on your shoulders. And you remember Francis, his voice, his smile, the quiet strength of his presence beside you, not commanding, but constant. There is a moment, brief and aching, when you wish he could see you now, not to admire, simply to sit beside you again. In the weeks that follow, you continue your walks, though shorter now, always with a maid, always with care, but you insist, because Schönbrunn is not just a residence, it is a memory you've shaped with your feet, a place you've ruled, planted, wept, laughed. You want to feel it one more time, not as Empress, but as Maria. You stop by the conservatory. The orange trees are thriving. A gardener tells you the roots have deepened more than expected this year. You nod, brush your hand along the leaves, and smile. The deep roots always surprise us, you say. And then, one morning, you do not rise. There is no dramatic moment, no collapse. You simply remain still, breath shallow, heartbeat slow. The attendants call for the physician. Joseph is summoned. Your daughters gather, hushed and pale. You speak only once, barely audible. Keep it whole, you whisper. Whether you meant the empire, the family, or the memory of yourself, they do not know. Perhaps it was all three. Later, as the bells toll over Vienna, people gather in the streets, not to riot, not to grieve loudly, but to bow their heads. You're not mourned as a ruler of victories, not as a conqueror, but as a mother of an empire, steady, patient, and enduring. In the days to come, Joseph will begin his reign in full. His pace will quicken, his changes will be sharp. Some will bear fruit, some will not. But through it all, your legacy will echo, in every law that bears your quiet logic, in every hospital that opens its garden, in every child who learns to read beneath the seal of a crown you once wore. Because though your breath has faded, your example has not. The corridors of the palace hold their breath. Your absence is not yet complete, not yet public. Within the thick walls of Schönbrunn, the news has passed from whisper to whisper, like the flicker of a candle about to go out. Footsteps fall softer, conversations begin, then trail off. Even the clocks seem to tick with greater hesitation, as though time itself is reluctant to move past you. Your body lies in state, not in the grandest hall, but in the one you chose, the chapel room, small and echoing, where light filters through stained glass and lands gently on the worn wooden floor. It was here, many years ago, that you once knelt alone after your father's death, hands folded, eyes dry, spine unbowed. Now, others kneel for you. They come quietly, by ones and twos, servants in simple black, cooks with trembling lips, children you once helped sponsor now grown and clad in borrowed silk. One by one, they pause before your still form and bow not to a monarch, but to memory. Joseph sits beside you. He does not weep. His jaw is clenched, his posture as rigid as the throne he has inherited, but his hand, resting gently on yours, trembles, just once. He will not show this to others. He will become emperor with a storm in his chest, but he will not let it spill. Not now. Later, he will write. She died as she lived, without spectacle, but with meaning. Your daughters arrive from across Europe. Maria Christina from Brussels, dressed in veils too heavy for her slight shoulders. Maria Amalia from Parma, her voice quieter than usual, her defiance stilled by sorrow. Others come too, daughters who are scattered like seeds across the continent, now returning to the tree from which they came. They sit together, hands clasped, no longer archduchesses or consorts, just daughters. And in their eyes love, guilt, wonder. Because somehow, despite the distances, despite the politics and arranged marriages and separations by sea and duty, they remember your voice, not the public one, not the voice of law or judgment, but the voice that told stories by firelight, the one that knew every child's cough and favourite ribbon. That voice lingers now. It is said, quietly, that in the final hours you murmured prayers, not just for your soul, but for Austria, for its fields, its mothers, its orphans, for those you never met, for the ones you hoped your laws had reached. You asked for peace, not for yourself, but for the land. Historians will later debate the date of your final breath, the last reforms you signed, the nature of your relationship with Joseph in your final months. They will trace lines, make judgments, draw maps of influence and legacy. But they will miss this. The way the light fell that morning in the chapel room, the way a maid placed your favourite comb beside your pillow, the way someone, no one knows who, laid a single lilac on your chest, because that was the flower you had loved most, not for its colour, but for its timing. Lilacs bloom just after winter, in the space between cold and warmth, where nothing is quite certain, and yet everything begins again. And so it is with you. Your funeral is simple, by your request. No gold, no marble excess, just hymns sung clearly, footsteps measured on cobblestone, and a procession of people who span the empire's width, from noble to servant, scholar to shoemaker. They say that Vienna wept, not loudly, but deeply. And in the days that follow, a quiet change occurs. Your portrait, once displayed in court robes, is moved. It is replaced by a newer likeness, one painted just before your final illness. No crown, no jewels, just a woman in a simple blue gown, looking out a window, one hand resting on a folded letter. That is how they remember you now. Not on a throne, but in motion. Still listening, still working, still thinking of others. There is a final detail noted in your estate ledger. You left instructions for one final endowment, a small school to be established in a remote Carpathian village. One teacher, one stove, 2 bookshelves. You never visited it, but you had read a letter once from a girl there who had walked 8 hours to borrow a Bible. That girl is grown now. She will be the school's first teacher. And so, even as the empire marches on, as Joseph implements his sweeping reforms, as borders shift and centuries pass, your hands remain in motion, turning pages, tending gardens, tying shoes, writing quietly in margins the names no one else remembered, because you understood something rare, that greatness is not in being remembered by history books, but in being remembered by the people who no longer needed to write to you for help, because you had already helped, and they did not forget. The seasons change once more. You're no longer here to see them, but Austria remembers. It remembers in rhythm, in habit, in custom shaped quietly over time, until it feels as though it always existed. Your laws are still read in provincial courts, the paper yellowed but intact. Your edicts, once debated, are now simply followed. Your initials, once bold at the bottom of reforms, now live as preambles in textbooks and footnotes in the empire's great ledgers. But you linger elsewhere, too, in places no historian bothers to archive, in the curtain patterns of Viennese orphanages, designed to mimic the lilac leaves you once pressed into a book, in a small garden behind a garrison hospital in Innsbruck, where rosemary and thyme grow in orderly rows beside the soldiers' beds, in the names Maria Theresa. Maria Theresa, whispered to newborn girls across the land, in cities you never saw and languages you never spoke. You're no longer on the throne, but your seat was never the source of your power. It was the way you walk to it. Joseph now wears your crown. His reforms are bold, sometimes brash. He abolishes serfdom. He seizes monastic lands. He declares that the dead should be buried in reusable coffins. He means well, but he moves quickly. He does not wait for the people to follow. Sometimes the empire stumbles behind him, but in moments of doubt, he remembers you. He returns, now and then, to the Schönbrunn gardens, walks the same paths you did, pauses by the orangery, sits on the same stone bench where, once, you handed him your worn copy of Tacitus and told him power endures in silence. He never said it aloud, but he kept that book, and now, as the 1780s pass, as revolutions stir in France and Enlightenment thinkers sharpen their pens, Joseph finds himself facing a world more fragile than it appears. He writes in his private journal, "I was given the empire whole. I hope I do not leave it cracked. He still rules by law, but sometimes he rules by memory. Of your steadiness, of your pauses, of the way you always asked a question before giving an answer. Elsewhere, in corners of the realm, your legacy ripples outward. In a tiny school in Galicia, a girl recites Latin verbs beside a portrait of you in chalk. In Lombardy, a widow appeals her landlord's demands, citing a clause from your 1767 reforms, her voice shaking but proud. In Prague, a young composer dedicates his first sonata to her imperial memory, not because he knew you, but because he knows what your reign meant. And in Vienna, on the anniversary of your death, a mass is held, not state-sponsored, not extravagant, just voices, high and clear, singing by candlelight in the imperial chapel where once, long ago, you sat in grief and asked for strength. Now they sing for you. You are gone, and yet not gone. Because you shaped an empire not through force, but through form, through letters, through listening, through love that wore the face of policy. You were a woman who carried 15 children and the burdens of 1,000 cities. You were a queen who governed without the hunger for conquest, but with the discipline of care. You were a soul who knew that to lead was to witness. And so, my dear sleepy listener, let us rest here, beside her memory. Let us pause, as she once did, in the quiet rooms where decisions were made not with a shout, but with a whisper. Let us look back on this long road, from the candlelit desk in Vienna to the distant villages where her name still flickers on the lips of those who never knew her. Maria Theresa, Empress, matriarch, memory. You may close your eyes now. She is still here, in every page, every promise, every small thing done with great care,